Liberal
Queensland is still recovering.
Our national flag.
Smuggling operation, some of the world's most devastating events.
ABC News.
ABC News.
ABC News.
Wall Street closes down 4%. Grim economic warnings send world shares tumbling yet again.
The world is in a danger zone. In 2008, many people said they did not see the turbulence coming. Leaders have no such excuse now.
America's top brass points the finger at Pakistan, accusing it of supporting terrorists.
The second, but no less worrisome challenge we face is the impunity with which certain extremist groups are allowed to operate from Pakistani soil.
Out of jail and on his way, Sydney's hoax bomber heading to Australia to face charges.
And it's finals time. Hawthorn prepares to upset Collingwood.
Good morning, it's Friday the 23rd of September. I'm Michael Rowland.
And I'm Virginia Trioli. The top story on ABC News Breakfast this morning. In breaking news today, the US market has suffered its worst two-day trade since 2008. The Dow Jones has dropped, the Nasdaq has fallen as well.
The Dow Jones has fallen nearly 5% in a grim day on Wall Street. Those falls followed a horrid day for European markets. London's FTSE closed down nearly 5%. That's the biggest one-day fall there in 2.5 years. France's bourse fell 5.25%, while Germany's DAX ended the day 5% lower. The Australian dollar has slipped even further overnight. It's now well below parity, buying 97 US cents. For more on the turmoil on Wall Street, Craig McMurtry joins us now from Washington. Craig, good morning.
Good morning.
And from London, we're joined by our Europe correspondent, Philip Williams. Phil, good morning to you. In fact, let's start with you, Phil. This market reaction happened in your patch overnight. Just how horrid were those losses on European markets?
Well, terrible. Billions have been wiped off the bourses all over Europe, and there's just people are running for cover. There's simply a lack of confidence everywhere, and we've been hearing these warnings from multiple sources now. The latest from the United States, of course, saying, look, we are in very, very dangerous territory here. And the pressure on the European governments, on European leaders to get their act together, to come up with a credible plan that's going to actually get the countries like Greece, like Italy out of the danger zone and also settle these very troubled markets.
And there are still very real fears that Greece will be allowed to or be forced to default.
Yes, the markets, in fact, have built it in. They expect a default now. It's really the governments that are, in a sense, lagging behind. The markets believe that the governments will be led there, kicking and screaming. Although they say they are not going to go there, the markets believe they'll have to end there because they say the numbers simply don't add up and that Greece ultimately just has to go into some sort of default. It then becomes a question of an orderly or a disorderly default.
Well, Craig McMurtry, this market contagion swept quickly across the Atlantic. Take us through the day on Wall Street.
It was a pretty wild day here. I mean, in the last hour, we were seeing the Dow testing its lows again. At one point, it was well below 500, though it's come back a bit in the last half hour of trading. The Dow off 390 points. That's 3.5%. The Nasdaq down about 82. That's 3.25%. The S&P 37 points down roughly, or just over 3%. High volumes across the board selling, even stocks that have previously survived big sell-offs, Amazon, Yahoo, Google, a real flight to bonds, to dollars. Now, as this was going on, the IMF and World Bank leaders were gathering here. They're starting those meetings tomorrow. World finance ministers coming to Washington. There's a real sense here that the American markets at least are looking for something out of these meetings. Robert Zoellick, the World Bank chief, held a press conference this morning saying that the world is in a danger zone. Then Christine Lagarde, the IMF chief, held her press conference also talking about the world economy being in a dangerous place. But at the same time, she was shrugging off daily market fluctuations. Here's some of what she had to say.
Well, number one, our action, our analysis, and our proposed policy mix is not dictated by the day-to-day variation of the Dow Jones, the Nasdaq, the CAC, or the DAX. And we really try to look at the fundamentals of economies. We try to look at the policies that have been decided, and more importantly, the implementation of those policies.
Christine Lagarde there, and if I go back to you briefly, Craig, she may very well try to discount those sometimes very wild day-to-day fluctuations, but those traders who live and die on buying and selling is just simply ignoring it.
Well, there's just no buying interest at present. I mean, that was the thing. Listening to the analysts, watching the market today, there was this expectation, as you would know, Michael, in America, the cable channels can follow what's going on Wall Street pretty slavishly. Traders are always talking up buying prospects. You often see a bounce, and it just didn't happen today. There was almost a sense of defeat. Now, it did come back in the last half hour, but there is this real hunger. It is a hunger in this country right now for some sort of direction, some sort of leadership. They're not getting it out of Washington overnight. There was a failure of Congress to pass a stopgap funding bill, and that hasn't obviously caused the sell-off today, but there's not leadership in Washington. They're worried about the direction in Europe, and that's why there is this hunger for some sort of outcome from these talks between world finance ministers in Washington over the next few days.
And Phil, Christine Lagarde being French knows full well the problems facing Europe. What is the outlook there over the course of the next days and weeks?
Well, there's not a lot of optimism here either. There simply aren't the messages coming from the political sphere that give people some sense that solutions are afoot. And that's the major problem now, that people are really looking to their governments and to their central banks to provide solutions. And at the political level, those solutions simply aren't apparent.
Phil Williams in London and Craig McMurtry in Washington, thank you both for your insights this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now here's Virginia with the rest of the morning's news.
Michael, thank you, and good morning, everyone. Also in the news this morning, the man accused of Sydney's neck bomb hoax should be back in Australia by tomorrow. Paul Peters is now being flown to Los Angeles, and he'll be met there by 2 New South Wales police officers who will then escort him back to Sydney. The 50-year-old Australian businessman is now facing several charges after allegedly attaching a fake bomb to the neck of Madeline Pulver in her Mossman home. The Health Services Union has set up an independent review of its credit card policy and other financial practices. It'll be headed by the President of the New South Wales Bar Association, Bernie Coles QC. The union's national president, Michael Williamson, is taking a leave of absence during the inquiry. He's denied that he's misused union funds. The New South Wales Police are also investigating allegations of inappropriate practices at the Health Services Union. America's most senior military officer has accused Pakistan's spy agency of supporting a militant group responsible for last week's attack on the US Embassy in Kabul. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, has told Congress the militant Haqqani group is virtually an arm of Pakistan's intelligence agency. Pakistan officials have denied any links. Greece has been crippled by a 24-hour transport strike over the government's tough austerity measures. Public transport was shut down and airports were seriously disrupted. A mass protest of public servants is planned later in the day. The Greek government announced another round of tax hikes and spending cuts just a day ago. And 2 Muslim women have become the first people in France to be convicted of covering their faces with veils in public. The French government outlawed the practice earlier in the year. The women were fined around $100 each. They say they'll appeal the verdict in the European Court of Human Rights.
A court decision in Darwin yesterday could see people smugglers released from jail. The Northern Territory Legal Aid Commission won a case in the Supreme Court, arguing that people smugglers intercepted more than 12 nautical miles off Australia's coastline have not broken the law. Jane Barden reports from Darwin.
To the dismay of the federal government, the boats carrying asylum seekers keep coming. The Northern Territory Supreme Court has ruled that people smugglers caught more than 12 nautical miles off the coast before June last year have not broken the law. Justice Jenny Blockland ruled that to prove an offence against the Migration Act requires proof that the subject persons cross the outer boundary of Australia's territorial sea.
If people were outside of the 12-mile limit, maritime limit off the Australian coast, they weren't in fact committing any offence under Australian law.
Ahmed Ahmed has been detained in Darwin since being caught bringing 49 asylum seekers from Indonesia by boat in May last year. He didn't deny that he intended to go to Australia or that they wanted to seek asylum. But Justice Blockland said the location of the detection and interception took place outside of Australia's territorial sea. Therefore, the prosecution will be unable to prove an offence against the Migration Act. Waiting in detention for up to a year to face court, the frustration of Indonesian crewmen has repeatedly boiled over. Lawyers say many charges could now be dropped and some convictions could be overturned.
This may open the Commonwealth up for claims of false imprisonment. It may certainly open the Commonwealth up to claims in relation to compensation.
The decision only opens the door to challenges in the cases of people smugglers caught before the end of May last year, because the government's now changed the Migration Act. And Crown prosecutors have indicated they also intend to challenge the Supreme Court decision.
Jane Barden reporting from Darwin there. Now, the federal government's border protection policies will remain in limbo for several more weeks.
A vote hasn't yet been held on the government's proposed changes to migration laws. So to talk more about this, Melissa Clark joins us now from Canberra. Melissa, good morning. Parliament's risen now and the vote wasn't taken.
That's right. They only started debate yesterday morning, and it was always ambitious to think they might get to the point where they would have a vote by the end of yesterday when Parliament rose for a 2-week break. And of course, it didn't happen. Now the government is saying the opposition was filibustering. The opposition is saying the government didn't want a vote to come on because it knew it would lose. But the point is they didn't have much time to debate it, and they haven't managed to get through that process. So now we have the next 2 weeks or so until Parliament comes back and we can get to this point. And it's going to be a lot of lobbying in those 2 weeks, because we understand the government has the support of the crossbenchers to ensure that the coalition's amendment doesn't get up. However, they'll still be lobbied during this time period, and frankly it's almost a moot point what happens in the lower house, because there's no way it could go through the upper house. So plenty of time for games in the meantime, but the substantive issue is there isn't a solution and we're not any closer to getting one.
Looking more closely at those games or at the strategy, if there is one on the government side. Melissa, did you detect just what the government was trying to get at here during the week with its repeated attacks on Tony Abbott as, you'll be responsible for more boats coming, that's what you want, and then seemingly delaying the vote and the discussion and then bringing one on?
Yeah, the government is still hoping that it can put enough political pressure on Tony Abbott to make him rethink his position of blocking this move. They are hoping that with the right amount of pressure and with the thought that perhaps the next government may well be a coalition one, at which point they would want to bring in that Nauru solution, that they may then find themselves in legal difficulty if there haven't been legislative changes. So they're hoping that there's the combination of an element of foresight that might make Tony Abbott realise that there's an element of self-interest in this as well, but also that if boats do keep coming, which is what they are getting and what the Immigration Department is telling them will happen, that they can try and move some of that political blame onto Tony Abbott and try to hold him responsible for the fact that a solution hasn't been found.
I just got the sense yesterday watching Question Time that Julie Gillard was almost waiting for Philip Ruddock to pop his head up in this debate, which he did with a question to her, and she was right on him about, you're the one who should well understand the need to be able to legally process offshore.
Absolutely, and that's what we've seen with the government's trying to find a way to make this work. Initially, they wanted to just have this debate about this proposal in the next sitting of Parliament, which will be in October. But then there came the sense that no, that given how much urgency they have created around this issue, they needed to bring that debate forward. Now it's ended up being in October anyway, so there's certainly a lot of tactics on the run going on in this situation.
Look, in the meantime, and I guess it was inevitable given how bad her figures are when it comes to the polls. Leadership speculation, there's that phrase again. Is it game on? Is it underway? Is it just a media diversion at the moment, Melissa?
Look, there's an element of all of those things in it. There's certainly an element of diversion, and the coalition is pushing any whiff of speculation very hard because it certainly suits their agenda too. But when you have polling numbers this low, it is indeed inevitable that people are going to be talking about leadership. But it's not on seriously just yet. There are a couple of elements to look at here. Firstly, Kevin Rudd is certainly playing this down because he's making it very clear he's not counting the numbers. He's over in New York at the United Nations General Assembly. But the point is, now wouldn't be a good time for Kevin Rudd to try and make a comeback if that's what he wants to do, because at the moment a change of leadership isn't necessarily going to solve any of the problems that Labor is facing. Getting rid of Julia Gillard is not going to change the fact that there isn't at the moment an asylum seeker policy that is in place and is likely to work. Changing leaders isn't going to solve that policy dilemma and some of the other policy dilemmas. It's not going to change that sense of legitimacy around the government when we've had an election with claims made about carbon taxes before and what's happened subsequently. So there's that to keep in mind. And there's also the fact that for as much as there are many in Labor who are very worried about the polling numbers, there's still a lot of antipathy towards Kevin Rudd across the caucus, and there's a lot of support for Julia Gillard. She is popular amongst her colleagues. She is given a lot of credit by her colleagues for being hardworking and intelligent. It's just not managing to deliver the results at the moment. So there's not expected to be any sort of serious leadership moves and serious counting of numbers, at least until the end of the year when the ALP goes through its national conference in December. But as long as those numbers are low and as long as there's a former Prime Minister with ambitions in the background, this talk will continue.
Melissa Clark, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Let's look at the front pages of the major newspapers around the country now. And the Financial Review says the Australian share market has fallen to its lowest level in more than 2 years.
The coalition believes Kevin Rudd is counting the numbers as he considers a return to the Labor leadership. That story's in the Sydney Morning Herald.
The Prime Minister knocked back a request by Kevin Rudd to travel to the US on a junket, reports the Daily Telegraph.
The Australian reports on new visa rules for international students aimed at stopping the sharp decline in overseas enrolments.
The aide says the Victorian government has been forced into an embarrassing backflip over land rezoning on Phillip Island.
The Courier Mail reports Queensland's hospitals are under pressure to cut spending because of a fresh wave of cost cutting.
The Herald Sun is putting the spotlight on tonight's bumper match between Collingwood and Hawthorn.
South Australia's Peak Motoring Group is calling on the government to give motorists more information on oil prices. That's in the Advertiser.
The West Australian says Christian schools are singing an alternative version of the national anthem, which promotes Christian values.
The Mercury reports a fox skull has raised doubts about Tasmania's multi-million-dollar plan to hunt the animals down.
And the Northern Territory News says a thief has robbed a wheelchair-bound woman in her home.
Now, there's a fair bit to talk about at the end of a rather frenetic parliamentary week and a bitter and rancorous one too. That legislation concerning asylum seekers being processed offshore, well, that just now gets put on the back burner. It's off the stove, not even on the flame anymore. And of course, we have that extraordinary claim by Admiral Mike Mullen, which I guess might not mean a great deal to us here in Australia, but it's something for you to consider when we talk about the aftermath of the then so-called war on terror. Just who are your friends and who are your enemies when America believes this about Pakistan?
Yeah, well, it's not too remote from us because the Australian military has very close ties with the Pakistani military. Yeah. There are a number of training programs. We're deeply involved in Afghanistan like the Americans are. So very deeply concerning and very direct words from Mike Mullen, basically accusing the Pakistani intelligence service of being behind that recent attack in central Kabul. So if you'd like to buy in on that or the very messy situation in federal politics at the moment, please do. Our email address is breakfast@your.abc.net.au and you can talk about the show online. We're on Facebook and Twitter.
Let's take a quick look at the weather for you now. Brisbane, a fine day in 27. Sydney, sunny, a gusty afternoon change, top of 29 first though. Canberra, sunny in 23, and Melbourne, an early shower or two, 17.
Hobart, a shower or two, clearing, 12. Adelaide, fine, mostly sunny, 17. Perth, mostly sunny, 20. Darwin, partly cloudy, and wait for it, 35 degrees.
Nice to hear. These are the top stories on ABC News Breakfast today. The grim economic outlook has caused more big falls on world markets. European shares plummeted 5%. Wall Street followed that lead, closing down around 4%. The Australian dollar has also slipped to around 97 US cents.
America's top military officer is accusing Pakistan of supporting terrorists. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, has pointed the finger at Pakistan's spy agency. He's accused it of supporting the militant group responsible for last week's attack on the US Embassy in Kabul.
And the man accused of Sydney's neck bomb hoax is on his way to Los Angeles and then home. Paul Peters will be met there by 2 New South Wales police officers who will escort him back to Sydney. He's expected to arrive in Australia sometime tomorrow.
Pakistan's Interior Minister has reacted angrily to those claims by America's top military official that Pakistan's Secret Service is helping terrorists plan attacks in Afghanistan.
The US Joint Chiefs of Staff Admiral Mike Mullen says he has intelligence that shows the Haqqani terror network acts as a veritable arm of Pakistan's ISI.
In choosing to use violent extremism as an instrument of policy, the government of Pakistan, and most especially the Pakistani Army and ISI, jeopardizes not only the prospect of our strategic partnership, but Pakistan's opportunity to be a respected nation with legitimate regional influence. They may believe that by using these proxies, they are hedging their bets or redressing what they feel is an imbalance in regional power. But in reality, they have already lost that bet. By exporting violence, they've eroded their internal security and their position in the region.
If you say that it is ISI involved in that attack, I categorically deny. I categorically deny. We have no any such policy to attack or to aid attack through Pakistani forces or through any Pakistani assistance. So please, I assure you that is not there. It's not going to be there in future. But what is important, the impression which is being created, that has to go. Saying whatever intelligence you have, share with us. We work together because our main goal is to eradicate this menace of terrorism.
Pakistan's Interior Minister there. Let's go back to our top story now, and it has been yet another grim night on global share markets. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news yet again this morning, but there's no other way of spinning this. The Dow Jones has fallen nearly 400 points. That's a drop of about 3.5%. The Nasdaq down 83, the S&P 500 is down 43, and in London the FTSE has also seen a lot of red ink. It's closed down 247 points, also big falls in Germany and France. Checking commodity prices, West Texas crude is trading at $80.13 a barrel. Tapis crude's at $117.35 a barrel, and gold's at $1,737 and 1 cent an ounce. The Australian dollar, look at that, 97 US cents. It was what, $1, just on $1 this time yesterday morning, 72 euro cents and 63 pence sterling.
There you go, the overseas holidays. Now, the days of the Australian economy living off the sheep's back, of course, are well and truly gone. But lamb's always been a favourite, albeit a rather expensive one in the last few years on dinner tables.
Now it's at the centre of the latest battle in the supermarket discount wars. Amy Bainbridge reports.
Farmers were outraged earlier this year when Coles decided to sell its home brand milk for $1 a litre, and Woolworths quickly followed. Now, after scaling record high prices, lamb is in the discount spotlight. Both major supermarkets have cut the price of a leg of lamb by a third. Woolworths to $8.99 a kilogram and Coles to $9.
We are absorbing the cost of this, and this will be good for Australian farmers because it will entice more Australian families into enjoying lamb again.
The heavy discount has caught farmers by surprise, but the industry is adamant it can weather any price storms. And the Sheep Meat Council says overseas markets continue to be lucrative.
I have to be really careful not to underestimate the impact that Coles and Woolworths might have in the marketplace. Having said that, we send Australian sheep to over 100 markets. There's a lot of people out there in the marketplace who are very keen to buy our product.
Farmers currently get around $5 a kilo for lamb. In February, a pen of top quality lambs fetched $233 a head. Woolworths says the record prices mean many people now believe having a lamb roast is too expensive. So Meat and Livestock Australia says the time is right to discount.
If there's one time of the year you can do it, it's spring. And even our own industry, is funding campaigns at this time of the year to increase the spring lamb message.
Both retailers and lamb producers are hoping for the same result from this current price war. They want consumers to see lamb as affordable and for it to remain a staple on Australian dinner tables. Amy Bainbridge, ABC News.
I think I might have lamb tonight, based on that.
You can afford it.
I can afford it.
Excellent.
Just lamb with bananas for dessert. Second mortgage on the house. Here
It's
it
a
comes.
wealthy household, isn't it?
I wish. OK, let's look at the sport headlines now. And Paul Kennedy, a huge match in the AFL tonight.
Yes, that's on my menu this evening, Michael. I'm going to settle down for a bit of Wallabies action and then watch some preliminary final action. Can't wait.
Another big weekend on the couch for Paul Kennedy.
I've clocked up some hours in the last few weeks. Now, Hawthorn is planning to end Mick Malthouse's coaching career tonight as the Collingwood team takes on Hawthorn at the MCG. And, of course, there were plenty of people down there to watch Collingwood train. They saw that Ben Reid was OK to go. Dale Thomas comes back into the team. Tyson Goldsack and Alex Fazzola, they're out. Lance Franklin is looking good for Hawthorn, heavily strapped in that knee, but he played well last week and kicked a few goals, and he'll be better prepared this week. Alistair Clarkson is plotting the demise of his opponent. Of course, Mick Malthouse is not going to be coaching Collingwood next year, so if they lose tonight, it'll be his last game as a coach of a senior team. 28 years he's been doing it. Let's hear now from the coaches.
He's good as gold, and he trained yesterday and just had a bit of a run around. He'll train today, and he's good as gold now. 5 sets of a tennis Grand Slam. You start to get to the semi-finals and the quarter-finals, you've got some really cracking games, and you don't win 6-1, 6-2, 6-3 in semi-finals very often.
Oh, well, I'm just trying to take it out of the equation because there's too much at stake and too many people involved in tomorrow's game without worrying about individual stuff. But as an individual, it's something that, of course, I have thought about it. That hunger and their inspiration really has been profound, to the point where our younger players, the players that have played there, really feel an obligation to them, and haven't allowed last year to get in the road of this year. Because we're not really defending anything. I keep saying to them, don't tighten up. We're not defending 2010. No one can take that off you. It's now 2011, and we've got to focus in on 2011. And that's been a common thread right throughout the year.
Michael Malthouse, the coach of Collingwood there. And, of course, in the NRL, the preliminary final tonight is Brisbane versus Manly. Darren Lockyer won't be there, although he's been helping out the team prepare this week despite that cheekbone injury. He's hoping to play next week in the grand final if his team can overcome Manly. Matt Gillette will be the man to take his place at 5'8", of course, and he's got a big job ahead of him because Manly is well prepared and has been one of the teams of the year. But don't discount Brisbane. They lost their coach just before the season and their chairman also. They've had the floods earlier this year. They've had really a lot to contend with, and they've come through with flying colours. So looking forward to that one as well, Brisbane versus Manly. Now, the Wallabies will play the USA tonight, and who would have thought 7 days ago that we'd be talking this one up as a crucial match for their preparation to try and get through to the quarterfinals. And Will Genia will be the captain because James Horwell's injured, and there's been a host of injuries as well aside from that. Tatatu Pallotta now has been injured. He's hurt his knee at training, but Ben Alexander, his teammate in the front row, says that he will be fine. And, of course, he spoke yesterday, Ben Alexander. He was right next to Anthony Faingo, who had a bit to say about the preparation for this match against the USA.
Taff will be fine. He's a pretty tough cookie, old Taff. It's not too many games go by where he takes a beating, and he puts his body on the line even at training every time he plays. But he'll be fine. I think it's just precautionary. He's pretty good with all his rehab and everything, so I think he just ices his knee after any session just to keep on top of it.
Will sort of takes on a role that he already has in the team. He's got a great aura about him, and he's someone that that really speaks well in the huddle. And James Horwell sort of leads by example.
His halfbacks want they want good quick ball. Something we didn't give him last weekend. So as forwards we know what he wants.
Ben Alexander there, and it's interesting, they're starting to have this discussion at the World Cup now, and Rocky Elsom, I might attach this to my Twitter account, Rocky Elsom's written a piece in The Australian about running rugby versus this boring penalty-ridden rugby where you have to kick for the sidelines and bomb instead of taking your chances and putting together phases and hanging on to the ball. Of course, Australia loves to play that attacking, attractive style of football, but I'm not sure it's a debate you should be having in the World Cup. There's either winning rugby and losing rugby. They need to adapt really quickly.
And we need winning rugby.
Yeah, that's right. You've got to do what it takes because there's Northern Hemisphere teams. They'll do what it takes, and that's why they do well at World Cups.
Good. Fingers crossed. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks.
Now, Vanessa O'Hanlon joins us with news, Vanessa, of another hurricane.
They just keep coming, Michael. This one is south of the Mexican coast. It's named Hillary and it's expected to continue to strengthen today as it passes through the warmer waters. Now, it looks like it will remain offshore, but heavy rain and strong winds will still affect the coastline. Another storm in the Atlantic is weakening and not affecting land at the moment. For us, and cloud over Tasmania is being generated by strong southeasterly winds as a cold front passes through the eastern districts of the southeast. Winds are gusting at 113 kilometres an hour at Tasmania's Cape Grim. Skies remain mostly clear across the rest of the country. A trough from the interior to New South Wales will combine with the front to bring a cooler gusty change to southern New South Wales. Ahead of the trough, warm northerly winds and isolated storms developing in northern New South Wales and southern Queensland. Tomorrow and Sunday, the trough will remain over Queensland and New South Wales. Later on tomorrow, showers will develop mainly near the ranges of New South Wales. A high will maintain cool winds in Tasmania, Victoria and South Australia. We'll have another front that will bring a change to Western Australia's southwest on Sunday. Fine over most of Queensland today with above average temperatures throughout most of the interior and only isolated showers about the east coast between Yeppoon and Cooktown, getting up to 35 degrees at Mount Isa. Fine and mostly sunny in New South Wales, apart from the chance of late showers about the southern coast. Strong northwesterly winds about the southern ranges. That's ahead of a cooler south to southwesterly change that'll hit the western, southern and central districts. Very high fire danger in Sydney, Illawarra, Hunter and North Coast. Also the Monaro, Alpine and northern slopes and northwestern districts. For Victoria, severe warning for damaging winds for western South Gippsland, East Gippsland and the northeast with isolated showers on and south of the ranges. They'll contract to the coast this afternoon. Fresh southwesterly winds will gradually ease during the day. Tasmania, scattered showers about the western, central and southern districts, falling as snow as low as 600 metres. Strong west to southwesterly winds will gradually ease during the afternoon. South Australia, cloudy day in the south with light showers along the southern coast. Mostly sunny across the north, 26 degrees for Coober Pedy. A partly cloudy day across the southern areas of Western Australia, a top of 20 degrees in Perth and 26 for Carnarvon. Very warm and sunny in the north of the state. Isolated storms about the top ends west coast. Otherwise mostly sunny across the Northern Territory. For the weekend, and you can expect fine conditions if you're in Brisbane, a shower or two in Sydney and Canberra, dropping back down to 15 degrees. A chilly down the way for Hobart with just a top of 13.
You're watching ABC News Breakfast, and still to come in our program, we'll have more for you on the turbulence on world markets. It's been another shocking night, and we'll also take a look at what's happening in the Health Services Union, which has set up an independent review into its governance. We'll be speaking to the union's national president, Kathy Jackson. And also ahead, we'll have a review of some of today's newspapers. This morning, we're joined by Mike Smith. He's the former editor of The Age and now heads Inside PR.
Leading the news this morning, a series of grim warnings about the global economy have caused more sharp falls on world markets overnight. Shares in New York, Europe and Asia have all suffered heavy losses. European markets were down around 5%. Wall Street closed around 3.5% weaker. The Australian dollar has also slipped even further overnight. It's now buying around 97 US cents. The man accused of Sydney's neck bomb hoax is flying to Los Angeles on his way back to Australia. Paul Peters will be met in LA by 2 New South Wales police officers who will escort him back to Sydney. He's due to arrive in Australia tomorrow. The Health Services Union has set up an independent review of its credit card policy and other financial practices. It'll be headed by the president of the New South Wales Bar Association, Bernie Coles QC. The union's national president, Michael Williamson, is taking a leave of absence during the inquiry. He's denied he misused union funds. America's most senior military officer has accused Pakistan's spy agency of supporting a militant group responsible for last week's attack on the US embassy in Kabul. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, has told Congress the militant Haqqani group is virtually an arm of Pakistan's intelligence agency. Pakistani officials are denying any links. And Greece has been crippled by a 24-hour transport strike over the government's tough austerity measures. Public transport was shut down and airports were seriously disrupted. A mass protest of public servants is planned for later in the day.
Returning to our top story, and a series of grim warnings about the global economy have caused more sharp falls on world markets. In the US, Wall Street closed around 4% lower. Washington correspondent Craig McMurtry says it was a volatile day of trading.
It was a pretty wild day here. I mean, in the last hour, we were seeing the Dow testing its lows again. At one point, it was well below 500, though it's come back a bit in the last half hour of trading. The Dow off 390 points, that's 3.5%. The Nasdaq down about 82, that's 3.25%. The S&P 37 points down roughly, or just over 3%. High volumes across the board selling, even stocks that have previously survived big sell-offs, Amazon, Yahoo, Google, a real flight to bonds, to dollars. Now, as this was going on, the IMF and World Bank leaders were gathering here. They're starting those meetings tomorrow. World finance ministers coming to Washington. There's a real sense here that the American markets at least are looking for something out of these meetings. Robert Zoellick, the World Bank chief, held a press conference this morning saying that the world is in a danger zone. Then Christine Lagarde, the IMF chief, held her press conference also talking about the world economy being in a dangerous place. But at the same time, she was shrugging off daily market fluctuations.
Craig McMurtry there. And as he just mentioned, the head of the International Monetary Fund has warned the chances of a global economic recovery are narrower now than at any time over the last 3 years. The BBC's Hugh Pym has the details.
Stock markets around the world have taken fright. Share prices have plunged. Investors looking at the major economies just don't like what they see.
We have a political crisis, a financial crisis, a banking crisis.
All of the economic figures which are being released from the US are terrible at the moment.
The numbers really coming out of the Eurozone or the world economy over the last few months have been deteriorating.
It's not just financial markets. Households, consumers and businesses on both sides of the Atlantic have been dealt a poor hand, with fears about jobs and livelihoods. Today, the new head of the IMF said there was a path to recovery, but the world economy was in a difficult place.
Our view is that the current economic situation is entering a dangerous phase. You will have seen that we have reduced our forecast on a global basis by regions as well, and we see downside risks on the horizon.
These three central bankers, Sir Mervyn King at the Bank of England, Ben Bernanke of the US Federal Reserve and Jean-Claude Trichet of the ECB, have all taken emergency action to support their economies. The Fed last night unveiled new financial policies to try to boost growth, but warned of significant downside risks, and the markets didn't like the sound of that. Here in the dealing rooms with share prices falling, there are real concerns about just where the world economy is heading, and fears that political leaders don't have solutions. And even if they did, there's a lack of will to implement them.
The background noise of misery and lack of any movement on either a political or a policy front looks like it's going to be around for some time. It's difficult to see where the decisive policy move is going to come from that's going to give people the confidence to start buying stock markets again.
Coming up with that decisive policy move is what 6 world leaders are now trying to do. They've written an open letter ahead of the next G20 summit, calling for action to support growth and confidence. Neither the US president nor the Eurozone leaders have signed it, but David Cameron has.
Face up to the debts, face up to the deficits, face up to the problems. Every country in the world has got to do that in a coordinated way so we can get growth moving.
Markets go up as well as down. There have been good days and bad days in recent weeks, but the fears about the future are back with a vengeance.
That's the BBC's Hugh Pym reporting there. Now back home, and the federal government's easing some visa requirements for international students in an effort to try to encourage more of them to come to Australia.
The changes include easing financial requirements for some student visas and introducing a new work visa for foreign students who graduate here. China correspondent Hui Fern-Tay reports from Beijing.
At no other point in Chinese history has there been so many of its students studying abroad, around 1.27 million of them to be exact. Most of them go to English-speaking countries like Australia and the United States. This student is heading to England.
It doesn't take as long to get a degree and the quality of education is better.
Australia is relaxing its visa requirements for overseas higher education students in a bid to regain its competitive edge. At present, students have to prove that they have the financial ability to live in Australia. This amount will be reduced by as much as $36,000, making visa processing quicker and easier. This Chinese education agent has welcomed the move.
I hope that the students resume confidence in Australia as an education destination, because this may have been affected by the exchange rate and changes to the visa policy.
Students who want to remain in Australia after graduating will be able to apply for a 2 to 4 year post-study work visa, an extra choice for those Chinese who choose to buck the trend by not returning home. Hui Fentei, ABC News, Beijing.
Now, Julian Assange, remember him? The man known for publishing secret diplomatic cables on the website WikiLeaks has condemned the publication of his biography today.
Mr. Assange tried to cancel the autobiography, which was written by a ghostwriter after hours of interviews with the cyber activist. Europe correspondent Philip Williams spoke to Canongate Publishing Director Nick Davies about their decision to go ahead with the much-anticipated book.
Julian Assange has described your company as not about freedom of information. They're about old-fashioned opportunism and duplicity, screwing people over to make a buck. Is that you?
That sounds like Julian, certainly in terms of the quotes. That's not us as a publisher, no. I think what Julian is overlooking there is that we had a contract in place with him. We still do have a contract in place with him, a live contract to publish his autobiography, which he willingly signed. He also signed up with 38 other publishers.
Does he still, nevertheless, get royalties?
Technically, what we've done is Julian tried to cancel this contract in June. He said he wanted to walk away from it. Given the number of difficulties we'd had in bringing the final manuscript into shape, we reluctantly agreed. We said, OK, Julian, if you want to walk away, it's sad. We would love to publish this book with you. But OK, let's part ways. But you need to repay your advance to us. He was unable to repay his advance to us because he'd signed that money over to his lawyer. So the contract is still live, and what we're doing today in publishing this book is honouring that original contract.
Let's look at the book itself, the contents. What do we learn about Julian Assange that we didn't know already?
I think we learn a huge amount. I think what I'd say to Julian would be, you don't need to be afraid of this book. You should be proud of it, and you actually owe a huge debt to your ghostwriter, because what he's done here is present a full portrait of Julian, a very balanced portrait of Julian. One of Julian's frustrations and annoyances throughout this year has been how he's been portrayed by the media as this almost cartoonish character, that he's some sort of James Bond villain. Or that he's a character from a Stieg Larsson novel. That's something the New York Times wrote about him in their critical introduction to their book. And what his ghostwriter has done here is actually paint a pretty sympathetic portrait of Julian. So Julian in these pages is quite honest about, his character flaws, that he is argumentative and stubborn and combative and highly opinionated. That's there. But he's also clearly self-deprecating and articulate and funny. So it's a very three-dimensional, full portrait of Julian.
In the book, he does also go into some detail about his encounter with two Swedish women who are behind now his legal problems and extradition hearings. In it, if what he says is accurately reflected in the book, he seems to say it was his coldness, his inattention to these women that created the problem, and that had he been a bit more considerate, he might not be in this position.
I think people need to read that chapter for themselves and make up their own mind. And I understand why right now a lot of the media is focusing on that chapter. In fact, it's not even an entire chapter, it's 3/4 of a chapter. For me, that section, that Swedish section, is not the most interesting aspect of the book. But I understand why people are focusing on it. I think they just need to read the book and make up their own minds.
You started off as friends. You're certainly not that now. Now, this is not unique in publishing, but it is unique, surely, to have an autobiography that's disavowed by the very man it's about.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think this is a first.
Is it an autobiography, really, if the person it's about says it's not?
It is if all the words in this book were given by Julian to his ghostwriter over a 3-month period in taped interviews.
In his statement, he clearly points the finger at the publishing, at your organisation as having not played to the rules, as having not given him the opportunities to correct, to redraft, as had been agreed.
What I go back to again and again is Julian gave this material willingly to his ghostwriter. He was then delivered a first draft manuscript at the end of March. He's had that manuscript now for 5.5 months. He's been given a number of opportunities to go away and work on this book, to come back with edits, redrafts, new material. He, to date, has not delivered a single word to us or to his ghostwriter on this book. So we think he's been given every opportunity to respond to this book.
Publisher Nick Davies speaking to our Europe correspondent Phil Williams, and it is more than ironic, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Don't you think?
You don't even need to acknowledge it in a sense. It is astonishing, isn't it? Remember, this is an autobiography. This is not an unauthorised biography that Julian Assange is saying, I don't want published. This is something that he received a cheque for and was completely a part of, and is now saying he doesn't want published.
Yeah, the man, you know, who's embarked on this global crusade for openness, freedom, information everywhere. When it comes to him, not so happy. So Julian Assange is being accused by some of his critics as being a bit of a hypocrite on that front this morning. You're watching ABC News Breakfast. These are the top stories. There's been more turmoil on world markets overnight. European shares fell around 5%, while Wall Street closed down 3.5%. It's the worst one-day fall in 2.5 years.
America's top military officer is accusing Pakistan of supporting terrorists. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, says Pakistan's spy agency supported the militant group responsible for last week's attack on the US Embassy in Kabul.
And the man accused of Sydney's neck bomb hoax is due back in Australia tomorrow. Paul Peters is flying to Los Angeles, where he will be met by 2 New South Wales police officers who will escort him back to Sydney.
Take a look at the national papers today. We're joined by Mike Smith. He's the former editor of The Age and now heads Inside PR. Mike Smith, always good to see you.
Good morning, Virginia. Good morning, Michael.
So you're starting with leadership discussions, sniffs, rumours. That's all we've got, isn't it?
Yeah, look, strange things often happen on the last day of a parliamentary sitting in Canberra, and I think there's a bit of a fever in the press gallery there. There's, I think they're on a death watch. The death of a government, and everybody wants to be the first to declare that death is there. But let's have a look first of all at the story in the Sydney Morning Herald. This is a very thin basis on which to base your main story on the front page of a big newspaper. What appears to have happened is that Tony Abbott, who of course is in the business of destabilising government,
yes, indeed,
he says that Kevin Rudd is talking to Labor MPs. Labor MPs are telling coalition MPs what it's all about. So then he's pressed to, OK, deliver. You know, where's your evidence for this? So out wheels Nigel Scullion, coalition MP. And what it turns out is that Nigel burst in on a telephone conversation, then sat down with another Northern Territory MP, had a couple of bottles of wine, and Scullion says the Labor MP indicated that it might have been Kevin Rudd on the phone. And on the basis of that, we've got this sort of feverish leadership speculation that is a sign of the atmosphere in Canberra.
And it's important to point out that the Labor senator involved, Trish McCrossan, is fervently denying that she said this, even after having bottles of wine with her
Correct,
Senate
yet it's
colleague.
still up there in lights in the Sydney Morning Herald on page 1. And there's a story next to it by their political editor, Peter Hatcher, who we know is very close to Kevin Rudd.
Let's see if we can get that. We had that briefly. Let's see if we can get that back up again. Yes, go on, Mike.
Peter Hatcher says there's no leadership challenge on, but you know, he says that even though Kevin Rudd's in New York, thousands of kilometres away, his ghost is behind every parliamentary pot plant, and that's what it's
lurking
about.
behind the aspidistra.
But all the commentators have joined in. Dennis Shanahan in The Australian, he says there's no leadership challenge on, but the destabilisation of Julia Gillard has begun.
Yes, and that's his phrase, make no mistake, it has begun, which links exactly into the point you're making about this rather feverish mindset that's building in the Canberra Gallery, and yeah, everyone wants to be the first one to call it.
But I mean, why would you do it? Why would Kevin Rudd be Tiberius on the telephone from the other side of the world on the last day of sitting when caucus is about to disperse for 2 or 3 weeks? But it is leadership season. Now, there's only 4 weeks of the House of Reps left this year. There's a break and then only 4 sitting weeks. That's the only opportunity, 4 weeks, if there is going to be a caucus ballot. So that builds up this sort of fever. But, you know, I think the most sensible piece of analysis this morning is by a man who we can trust on Labor numbers, and that's Graham Richardson.
He can count.
He says Rudd's core support has always been about 10. It's probably about 20 now.
Yep.
None of the big guns in caucus have crossed. He doubts whether they will. But he says it's more likely that the Labor caucus will go like obedient little lemmings over the cliff with Julia Gillard. It's a very despairing piece by Richardson.
Oh, really? So he reckons they're just in it until the death?
Look, he says this is supposed to be the year of delivery, and all we've had delivered is failure after failure. And he says his old party's on a race to the bottom on refugees, and he never thought that the Labor Party would out-redneck the coalition on policy. It's a very despairing piece.
There's a lot in the party who clearly believe that too, and clearly, you know, within the party room who are prepared to say it as well. Do you believe that there'd be a change of leadership before the next election, Mike?
I doubt it. I doubt it because I doubt whether it would make much difference.
That's what Kevin Rudd is thinking. Why would he, even if the numbers magically open for him, why would he come back and potentially lead the party, despite maybe a honeymoon period, to a crushing defeat?
That's exactly right. That's another point that's said to be in his mind. Why should I absolve the people who knifed me in the back?
Okay, how's this for a segue? Let's go from Kevin Rudd to Miley Cyrus.
Miley Cyrus, yeah. This is a lovely story. Just in 1 week, the Baillieu government down here in Victoria has done a huge backflip on a zoning. They rezoned 23 hectares of land down at Phillip Island near the coast into housing residential. The Age broke the story last Friday morning, and ABC Radio down here has hammered it with the residents' process. Then the Herald Sun got onto it yesterday with Miley Cyrus. She had tweeted to her 2.1 million followers that Phillip Island is a nice place and you should leave it alone.
Right.
She'd visited there once with her boyfriend.
Briefly.
Within 24
more
hours...
importantly, was photographed there looking Miley Cyrus and gorgeous.
Yeah, within 24 hours, the government had backflipped, reversed the decision. And of course, if you look, judging by the Herald Sun, which broke the Miley Cyrus story, it was all her doing, if you judge by that photo. And
Miley Cyrus influences Victorian politics.
And caption, yeah, of course, the Planning Minister, Matthew Guy, who did that humiliating backflip, said he couldn't give a stuff about Miley Cyrus, didn't really know who she was.
Hang on, has he got daughters of a certain age, do we know?
I don't know, but he did say he knew her father. Billy Ray Cyrus.
Right.
Oh, you don't want to admit to that. Yeah.
And of course, the Age.
I've got his age group immediately.
The Age, which broke the story last week but didn't have the Miley Cyrus story, has devoted its main story on the front page to explaining all the reasons why there was a backflip except Miley Cyrus. It was a community campaign. There was a revolt amongst some ministers and even the Premier's office.
That's understandable. The Age didn't have the Miley Cyrus photo, so why would they go with that angle?
Exactly right.
Now, the Herald Sun has got an instant circulation boost, care of its front page this morning.
Yeah, look, at the Herald Sun, the only thing that matters in Melbourne this time of the year is football, especially when it involves Collingwood.
Yep.
It's a fact that when the Herald Sun does put Collingwood on the front page, their circulation does rise substantially.
And I think we can't show it, but there's a Collingwood player on the back page as well, so maybe a double boost of circulation.
So they wouldn't even try and just sort of, keep some of the other constituents happy by having a Hawthorn player there as well? And that did occur to me. I thought, why make it... I understand your point about sales go up when there's a Collingwood player there, but why not just make it one and the other player a Hawthorn player?
There may be a Hawthorn player on the back page. That's where they belong as far as the Herald Sun is concerned.
I don't think there is.
Collingwood.
No, it's Collingwood. It's Collingwood on the back page as well.
Yeah, well, no, the sales...
They know their market.
They know their market,
amazing?
and time after time and time again, it is proven that Collingwood sells papers for the Herald Sun.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't they?
That's hilarious.
That's right. It came out in that unfair dismissal case launched by Bruce Guthrie, the former editor. I was there covering it, and he said it was paper strategy to put Collingwood on the front page because it delivered, I forget the figure, 20,000, 30,000 additional copies.
Yeah, and I think...
because that becomes a souvenir edition.
The first day of publication of the Sunday Herald Sun, some years ago, was the day of the Collingwood Premiership, 1990. Record sale because of that. They'd put on 100,000 papers compared to the combined sale of the two papers the previous week.
That's just hilarious. And back to The Age. No, we've covered that, I think. That's the Phillip Island scandal.
We can, before we go, show a very nice photograph. I know how much you like crocs. I'm sure you're a croc lover too, Mike.
Yes.
This, I think, is from the Northern Territory News. There it is.
Orange
and
croc.
there's a story behind there. It's not some genetic mutation. This croc apparently ate into a filter bucket or pipe, which upset the pH qualities of the water.
Yeah.
It was swimming or was drinking that water, and it's turned orange.
I know.
Tandoori croc.
I know a whole lot of women in Double Bay who look exactly like that too.
There have been croc wars between the Northern Territory News and the Cairns Post about which state has the biggest croc. It's been running for weeks.
We'll be seeing more of these Brownlow tan night, I think.
Yeah, that's right. That Crocosaurus night is coming up too. Mark, always good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Now, let's look at the rest of the day's news and sport, and indeed, attention does focus on the Herald Sun and elsewhere to the big clash tonight, Paul.
Yes, I've just had word from our executive producer who says show more Collingwood pictures, so here they are, getting ready for the match against Hawthorn tonight. And the Pies, they're under a lot of pressure tonight because they'll play this Hawthorn team. Hawthorn lost to Geelong in their first final. Collingwood brings back Reid, Thomas. So there are no excuses here. They've got a full team. Lance Franklin will be in opposition to them because he's fit and firing again, it seems. Heavily strapped knee, but he's moving well at training yesterday. And Alistair Clarkson, who plotted the downfall of the Cats back in 2008, he's plotting the downfall of Mick Malthouse there. Malthouse mentioned yesterday that he has been thinking about the end of his coaching career. And then they're the Eagles and the Cats to play tomorrow night. In League, it's all about the Broncos and can they overcome yet another setback with Lockyer not playing to beat Manly and go through to the grand final, maybe give Lockyer a chance to play next week. But Manly has been going about it very quietly this week, and you would expect them to be the favourites really against the Broncos team tonight. We'll wait to see how they go in the preliminary finals. And Michael and Virginia, in the next half an hour, there was that remarkable circumstance with the all-female crowd in Turkey. We'll bring you some pictures there and we'll talk about that unique situation. Imagine if there was 90,000 women tonight watching Collingwood and Hawthorn.
You need earplugs.
Yeah, well, there wouldn't be as many fights.
It'd be no fights. It'd be a fabulous thing. We'll talk about that story. It's really amazing how it sort of changed the nature of the game there, a female-only crowd.
Terrific. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Now here's Vanessa O'Hanlon with the weather. Vanessa.
Onto today's satellite image, and cloud over Tasmania is being generated by strong southwesterly winds as a cold front passes through the eastern districts of the southeast, but the skies remain fairly clear throughout the rest of the country. A trough from the interior to New South Wales will combine to bring a gusty cooler change to southern New South Wales. Ahead of the trough, warm northerly winds and isolated storms in northern New South Wales and southern Queensland. For Queensland today, 27 degrees in Brisbane, a mostly fine day, just some showers about the east coast from about Yeppoon and Cooktown. Fine and mostly sunny in New South Wales, apart from the chance of late showers about the south coast. Strong northwesterly winds about the southern ranges ahead of a cooler south to southwesterly change. In Victoria, isolated showers on and south of the ranges will contract to the coast this afternoon. Fresh southwesterly winds will gradually ease throughout the day. Tasmania, scattered showers about the western, central and southern districts, falling as snow as low as 600 metres. Strong west to southwesterly winds will gradually ease throughout the afternoon. Very cold temperatures again, 12 degrees in Hobart. South Australia, cloudy in the south with light showers along the southern coast, mostly sunny across the north. A partly cloudy day across the southern areas of Western Australia, 20 degrees in Perth, very warm and sunny up in the north. Isolated storms about the top ends west coast. Looking ahead to the weekend, a fine day for Brisbane, but we will see some showers about Sydney and Canberra with a top of 15 degrees. And it's been very windy in the southeast, but it's looking pretty good in Melbourne this morning. I'm about to head outside and have a look.
Terrific. Thanks, Vanessa. Now, lots more ahead on ABC News Breakfast. We'll have more for you on the turbulence on world markets.
Back after this short break.
Plan A didn't quite go to plan.
What astonishes me is that there was no plan B.
There should have been somebody, I would have thought, saying, well, what happens if the High Court judgment goes against us? What are we going to do then?
But do we need to panic?
America has over 10 million illegal immigrants, and they seem capable of dealing with other political challenges. But Australia, 5,000 a year in boats, it seems to just absolutely terrify us.
Keeping things in perspective. The Drum tonight at 6.
Once in a while, Monroe meets a different kind of patient.
This one is weighing heavier on me than most, all right?
But is the problem a tumour or something else?
What if I tell you that God is talking to me?
It's a story that will touch your heart.
What if there's something bigger than medical science?
When the brain surgeon finds himself treating the soul.
Your brain misfiring is not the same as God talking to you. You're not in my head.
Monroe, tomorrow 8:30, ABC One. Adelaide, the city of churches, with a dark secret.
Right now, alleged pedophiles have more rights than our children.
A heinous crime the Catholic Church did its best to ignore.
The parents wanted the church to come forward and say, gee, we've stuffed up.
Failing our children.
Something that I've got to live with for the rest of my life.
Four Corners exposes the bus ride to hell.